The Galactic Coalition Academy stood tall against the purple sky of Kepler 442b. Its crystal towers reached high into the clouds, shining in the light of two distant suns. For 3 generations, the Academy had trained warriors from 47 different alien species. They came here to learn how to fight together, to protect the galaxy from threats that no single species could face alone. But this year was different. This year, humans had finally been invited to join. Jake Morrison stood in a straight line with 200 other cadets. He tried to keep his face calm, but inside his heart was beating fast. He was 23 years old, older than most of the aliens around him. To his left stood the Valorians. They were huge creatures, nearly 8 feet tall, with skin covered in thick scales that looked like armor. To his right were the Kresh, barely reaching his shoulder but with 4 powerful arms that could bend steel bars like they were made of paper. Humans were considered weak by most species in the galaxy. They called his kind a Class D species. That meant humans had no special physical powers, average intelligence, and made too many decisions based on emotions instead of logic. Jake had heard these comments during the entire journey from Earth to this distant planet. Some aliens wondered why humans were even invited to the Academy at all. Instructor Velkoth walked slowly in front of the assembled cadets. He was a draconid, a species that looked like walking lizards with sharp teeth and cold eyes. His scales were dark green and covered with scars from many battles. The draconids had led the coalition military for thousands of years. They were proud, strong, and did not hide their belief that they were superior to almost every other species. Velkoth stopped and looked at the cadets with eyes that showed no emotion. His voice came through a small device that translated his hissing language into words everyone could understand. "Today you will meet the Carthax war beasts," Velkoth announced. His tone was cold and formal. "These creatures are the finest combat companions in all of known space. They are smart, deadly, and can form a special bond with warriors who are worthy. For 3,000 years they have chosen draconid handlers. Some Valorians have been accepted, a few Kresh as well. The rest of you will most likely be rejected. But this is our tradition. You will present yourselves. The beasts will decide your fate." Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Another test designed to show humans they did not belong here. Another way to remind them they were outsiders in this galaxy of ancient civilizations. The huge hangar doors opened with a loud hiss of air. What walked through those doors made several cadets take a step backward in fear. The Carthax was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It moved like a giant cat but stood as tall as a horse. It had 6 powerful legs that carried a body covered in black fur so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. Sharp crystal spikes ran down its back, glowing with a soft blue light. The creature's head was massive, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern, and a mouth full of teeth that looked like they could tear through metal. Everything about this beast screamed danger and deadly purpose. "This is Kaelmor," Velkoth said, and for the first time his voice held a note of respect. He is unbonded and in his prime years. He has rejected 47 candidates over the past year. You will approach when your name is called. The testing began. One by one, cadets stepped forward to face the war beast. Kaelmor would walk around them, smell them, and then either walk away with no interest or show his teeth in warning. A female Valorian named Shakira managed to hold the beast's attention for almost a full minute before Kaelmor snorted and dismissed her. When Velkoth called Jake's name, several draconid cadets made a hissing sound that Jake had learned was their way of laughing. The idea of a human bonding with a Carthax was clearly funny to them. It was so unlikely that it was almost a joke. Jake stepped forward, forcing his breathing to stay steady and calm. His grandfather had trained dogs back on Earth, working with search and rescue teams that saved lives during disasters. The old man had taught Jake important lessons about working with animals. Show respect, not fear. Show confidence, not aggression. Let the animal see who you really are inside. Kaelmor's 3 eyes locked onto Jake. The war beast moved forward with slow, careful steps. Each muscle under that midnight fur rippled with deadly power. Jake stood his ground as the massive head lowered toward him. The creature's breath was hot against his face, smelling strange, like metal and electricity mixed together. Then Kaelmor began to sniff. He started at Jake's boots and moved upward, his huge nose taking in every detail of the human's scent. The beast circled Jake slowly, deliberately, taking his time. The crystal spikes along Kaelmor's back began to glow brighter, pulsing with more light. Jake noticed that Instructor Velkoth was leaning forward slightly, his expression showing surprise for the first time. The sniffing became more intense. Kael'more's nostrils flared wide as he processed Jake's scent. His massive head moved around the human's body, then up to his neck and face. The entire hangar had gone completely silent. Even the translation devices seemed to stop working for a moment. 200 cadets and a dozen instructors watched without moving, without breathing. Then Kael'more did something that made Instructor Velkoth's jaw drop open in shock. The war beast lowered his massive head toward the ground. His front legs bent, bringing his chest almost to the floor in a gesture that looked like a bow. The crystal spikes along his spine blazed with brilliant blue light, brighter than they had been all day. When Kael'more raised his head again, his three eyes fixed on Jake with an expression that looked unmistakably like respect and loyalty. A deep rumble came from the creature's throat. The translation device in Jake's uniform instantly converted the sound into words that everyone could understand. Alpha acknowledged. The hangar exploded into chaos. Draconid instructors began shouting in their native language, their voices high with disbelief and anger. Cadets broke out of their neat formation, pushing forward to see what had happened. Velkoth's translator device was making rapid beeping sounds as it struggled to keep up with all the shouting and confused voices. Jake stood frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The massive war beast was still bowing before him, those three alien eyes watching him with something that looked disturbingly like devotion. Kael'more's tail swept slowly back and forth, and the crystal spikes on his back continued to pulse with that bright blue light. Jake had no idea what he had just done. He did not understand why this powerful creature had chosen him, when it had rejected so many others who seemed more qualified, more powerful, more worthy. But he was certain of one thing as he looked around at the shocked faces of instructors and the amazed expressions of other cadets. His time at the academy had just become very, very complicated. The impossible had just happened. A human, a member of a species considered weak and insignificant, had been acknowledged as an alpha by one of the most dangerous war beasts in the galaxy. Nothing like this had ever happened before in 3,000 years of history, and everyone in that hangar knew that everything had just changed. The medical bay of the Galactic Coalition Academy was filled with activity and noise. Scientists, combat specialists, and doctors surrounded Jake and Kael'more, running test after test, trying to understand what had happened in that hangar. For 6 long hours they scanned, measured, and analyzed every detail of the bond between the human and the war beast. They checked Jake's blood, his brainwaves, his genetics. They studied Kael'more's responses, his neural patterns, his chemical signals. They found absolutely nothing that made any sense. Dr. Linza was the head scientist, a member of the Vesper species who were known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and careful research methods. She had 4 thin fingers on each hand and large eyes that blinked slowly as she studied her data screen for the 3rd time. Her frustration was clear in every movement she made. The neural compatibility readings are extremely high, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. But this should be impossible. Humans do not have the right kind of chemical receptors that Carthax use to recognize pack members. Your brain structure is completely different from Draconid brains. By every measurement we have, by every test we can perform, this bond should not exist at all. Jake sat on the examination table, very aware that Kael'more was lying on the floor right beside him. The war beast had refused to leave his side since the bonding moment in the hangar. Any time someone tried to separate them, Kael'more would growl in a way that made people back up quickly and leave them alone. Commander Torgen stood nearby, watching everything with careful attention. He was a Draconid officer, but unlike Instructor Velkoth, his voice held no mockery or disrespect. Instead, he sounded genuinely curious about what had happened. Perhaps your instruments are broken, Torgen suggested. Or perhaps we simply do not understand humans as well as we thought we did. The instruments are working perfectly, Dr. Linza replied firmly, which means our understanding of either humans or Carthax or both is incomplete and wrong. She turned to face Jake directly. I need you to describe exactly what happened during the bonding moment. Tell me everything you felt, every thought you had, anything you sensed or noticed. Jake tried to find the right words to explain something he did not fully understand himself. I did not do anything special or unusual. I just stood there and let him come to me. I was not really afraid, though I probably should have been. It was more like careful respect, the way you would approach any dangerous animal. You show them you are not a threat, but you also show them you are not weak. He paused, thinking about his grandfather's lessons from long ago. My grandfather used to say that dogs can smell fear on people, but they can also smell confidence and intention. Not really with their noses, though. With something deeper, something that goes beyond physical senses. He called it reading the pack structure. Understanding who leads and who follows without anyone having to say a single word. Pack structure. Dr. Lindsay repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. Her fingers began moving rapidly across her data screen, typing and searching. Carthax are pack hunters in their natural wild state. They need a clear hierarchy to function properly in combat situations. She pulled up information and images on a floating screen. Most species approach this through displays of dominance or by producing special chemicals. Draconids and Carthax bond because draconids naturally produce a chemical marker that the war beasts recognize as superior pack status. But humans do not produce those chemicals. Your bodies cannot make them. No, Jake agreed, nodding his head. But humans have something different. We have been living in complex social groups for hundreds of thousands of years. We read each other constantly through body language, through tiny expressions on faces, through tone of voice, through posture and the way people stand or move. We know who is a leader and who is a follower before anyone speaks. We understand social hierarchies instinctively. Commander Torgan's tail moved slowly across the floor in a way that Jake had learned meant the Draconid was thinking carefully. You are suggesting that the Carthax recognize some quality in you that goes beyond biology and chemistry? I am suggesting that maybe Kelmore recognized what I am as a person instead of just what I smell like as a species. Kelmore made a low, rumbling sound that the translation devices did not need to convert into words. It was clearly a sound of agreement. The real breakthrough came 3 days later. Dr. Lindsay had organized a special study with Jake's permission. They brought 3 other Carthax into a training room, each one already bonded to a Draconid handler. The plan was simple. They would conduct standard formation drills while Jake and Kelmore watched from the side. The test began normally enough. The 3 Draconid handlers called out commands and their bonded Carthax responded, moving into military formations that they had practiced many times before. But within just a few minutes, strange things began to happen. The other Carthax started showing signs of confusion and agitation. They turned their heads away from their Draconid partners and oriented their bodies toward Jake instead. Their crystal spikes flickered with uncertain light patterns that did not match their usual steady glow. The Draconid handlers grew frustrated as their carefully trained companions broke discipline and stopped following commands. Then Dr. Lindsay asked Jake to give one simple command. Just 2 words, form up, Jake said. He had not meant to project authority or dominance. He had simply spoken in the same calm tone he might use to organize a study group back on Earth or call friends together for a meeting. But the reaction from the war beasts was immediate and could not be ignored. All 4 Carthax, including the 3 that were supposedly bonded to Draconid warriors, moved into a precise military formation with Jake at the center. Kelmore took the front position naturally. The 3 other war beasts arranged themselves at the sides and rear at perfect combat intervals. The formation was flawless, exactly what military doctrine called for. The 3 Draconid handlers stood with their mouths open in shock, unable to speak as their companions completely ignored them. By the void, Dr. Lindsay whispered, her large eyes even wider than usual. He is not just bonded to one Carthax. He is a pack alpha, a true alpha leader. Commander Torgan's expression changed from curiosity to something much more complex. There was respect there, certainly, but also concern and maybe even a little worry. In 3,000 years of working with Carthax, we Draconids have never produced a true alpha. We have had bonded pairs, yes. Functional partnerships that work well in combat, but never this. He looked at Jake with new understanding. Do you realize what this means? Jake was beginning to understand, yes. The other cadets in his training unit had already started treating him differently over the past few days. The Draconids looked at him with wounded pride and barely hidden resentment. The Valorians watched him with calculating eyes, clearly trying to figure out how to use this development to their advantage. The Kresh showed open curiosity, asking questions constantly. But it was the other humans at the academy who concerned Jake the most. The 4 other human cadets looked at him with hope and expectation, as if he represented something bigger than just one person's unexpected success. It means I'm going to have a very interesting and complicated year, Jake said quietly. Trying to make light of the situation, Kael'mor's rumble sounded almost like the war beast was laughing at that understatement. But that night, alone in his small quarters with only Kael'mor for company, Jake allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The war beast was curled up at the foot of his bed, a massive presence that somehow felt comforting rather than threatening. The galaxy had always considered humanity an afterthought, a minor species that was admitted to the coalition more out of politeness than because they brought any real strategic value. Humans were seen as weak, soft, too emotional, too primitive. They had no special powers, no natural weapons, no extraordinary abilities that made them stand out among the stars. Now, a human had done something that no other species had managed to accomplish in 3,000 years of trying. Jake had formed a bond so strong and natural that other Carthax recognized him as a pack alpha, on instinct alone. The question that kept Jake awake that night was simple but troubling. Would this unexpected development open doors for humanity and give his species new opportunities, or would it paint a target on his back and make him a threat that needed to be eliminated before humans became too powerful? Jake did not have an answer, but as he finally drifted off to sleep, one hand resting on Kael'mor's warm fur, he knew that his life had changed forever in that hangar. The impossible bond between a human and a war beast was just the beginning of something much larger, something that might change the entire galaxy. The training yards of the Coalition Academy covered 30 square kilometers of specially designed terrain. The ground could change to match any combat environment imaginable, from frozen ice fields to burning deserts to floating platforms in zero gravity. Today, the system was set to standard Earth-like conditions: normal gravity, breathable air, comfortable temperature. Some of the alien species had complained about this, saying it gave humans an unfair advantage, but the instructors had decided it was fair enough. Jake and Kael'mor moved through an obstacle course designed specifically for bonded pairs. The course tested communication, trust, and tactical coordination between handler and warbeast. Jake quickly discovered that Kael'mor did not need many verbal commands for most movements and attacks. The warbeast seemed to understand what Jake wanted through body language and some deeper connection that Jake still did not fully comprehend. "Left flank, hostile target Alpha," Jake said quietly. His helmet's tactical display marked 3 automated combat drones that were moving to attack them from the side. Kael'mor was already in motion before Jake finished speaking. The warbeast ran with explosive speed, his 6 powerful legs carrying him up a vertical wall that should have been impossible to climb. The crystal spikes along his spine launched 3 precise energy bursts, and the drones fell to the ground smoking and disabled before Jake had even taken a step forward. "Show off," Jake muttered under his breath, but he was smiling as he said it. From the observation platform high above, Instructor Velkoth watched with an expression that had slowly changed over the past 3 weeks. His initial dismissive contempt had evolved into something closer to grudging acknowledgement. Beside him stood Captain Lisa Hendricks, one of the human officers assigned to watch over Earth's first group of Academy cadets. His reaction time is 0.3 seconds faster than any Draconid handler we have ever measured, Velkoth admitted reluctantly. The bond efficiency rating is 94%. Even our best bonded pairs rarely exceed 78% efficiency. Captain Hendricks kept her face neutral and professional, but inside her mind, she was calculating what all of this meant politically. The Draconid High Command must have strong opinions about this situation. Opinions, concerns, accusations. Velkoth's tail swept across the floor in what Hendricks had learned was his species' version of a shrug. Some say the human must be using prohibited enhancements or illegal drugs. Others claim the Carthax is defective or damaged somehow. A few suggest both the human and the warbeast are aberrations that should be removed from the program entirely. And what do you personally believe, Instructor? The Draconid was quiet for a long moment, watching Jake and Kael'mor complete another difficult section of the course with perfect coordination. "I believe I have trained warriors for 43 years. I know excellence when I see it, regardless of which species is displaying that excellence." He glanced at Captain Hendricks. "But excellence makes enemies, especially when it comes from an unexpected and unlikely source." The warning proved to be accurate much sooner than either of them expected. That evening, Jake was walking through the commissary when 3 senior cadets blocked his path. 2 were Draconids and 1 was a Valorian, All three wore the red shoulder markings that identified them as second-year students. All three came from prominent military families with long histories of service. The leader was a draconid named Skarzeth. His scales were covered with ceremonial scars that showed his family's warrior heritage. He planted himself directly in Jake's path, his posture aggressive and challenging. Human. You will participate in a formal challenge tomorrow at dawn formation. Bonded combat trial. Jake had been at the academy long enough to understand what this meant. A formal challenge was an official duel sanctioned by academy regulations. It was used to settle disputes over rank, honor, or resource allocation. Refusing a formal challenge would mark him as a coward. It would bring shame not just to Jake personally, but potentially to humanity's entire standing in the academy and maybe even in the coalition itself. I accept your challenge, Jake said calmly. What are the specific terms and victory conditions? 3 pairs fighting against your single pair. Standard combat rules apply. Victory condition is incapacitation or surrender. Your Carthax against ours. Skarzeth's smile showed far too many sharp teeth. We will demonstrate to everyone that your bond is merely an anomaly, a fluke of chance. We will prove that humans are not worthy to stand beside true warriors as equals. Kalemore, who had been resting quietly in the corner of the commissary, raised his massive head. The temperature in the entire room seemed to drop several degrees as the war beast's 3 eyes fixed on the 3 challengers. A low growl emerged from deep in his throat that carried a clear message even without translation devices. Easy, boy, Jake said quietly, placing a hand on Kylemore's shoulder. We will give them our answer properly. On the combat field where it counts. That night, Captain Hendricks came to visit Jake in his quarters. You do not have to accept this challenge, she said seriously. A formal challenge is technically voluntary under coalition law. You are still just a first-year cadet. No reasonable person would blame you for declining to fight 3 second-year students and their war beasts. Yes, they would blame me, Jake replied. He was performing maintenance on his combat suit, carefully checking seals and power connections. And more importantly, I would blame myself. Besides, Kalemore and I are ready for this. The war beast rumbled agreement from where he lay on the floor, his crystal spikes pulsing with a steady, confident rhythm that showed no fear or doubt. Captain Hendricks studied them both carefully. Your grandfather trained dogs, you told me once? Search and rescue dogs, yes. Some police work too. Did he ever tell you what makes a good pack leader? What separates a true alpha from just someone who is strong or loud? Jake paused in his equipment maintenance and thought about the question. He said a good alpha does not lead through fear or brute strength alone. A good alpha leads by making the pack better, by understanding each member's natural strengths and putting them in position to use those strengths effectively. And you think you can do that? Make a 6-legged alien war beast perform better? Jake met her eyes directly. I think Kalemore was already brilliant before we met. He just needed someone who could recognize that brilliance and work with it instead of trying to dominate it. Dawn broke over the training grounds with rings of light as Kepler 442b's 2 suns rose in sequence. The arena was completely packed with spectators. Word of the formal challenge had spread through the entire academy like wildfire. Cadets from every species had come to watch. Humans were rare enough in the academy to be interesting, but one bonded to a Carthax was a genuine spectacle worth seeing. Jake entered the arena to mixed reactions. The human cadets cheered loudly for him. Many others jeered or made mocking sounds. Kalemore walked beside him calmly, the war beast's posture relaxed but alert. They took their position at one end of the combat zone. Skarzeth and his 2 teammates entered from the opposite side. Their 3 Carthax were impressive specimens, slightly larger than Kalemore, with scales and spikes that showed extensive combat training and experience. The 3 war beasts moved with the synchronized precision that only came from years of working together as a veteran pack unit. Instructor Velkoth stood at the arena's center, his voice amplified so everyone could hear clearly. Standard rules apply to this formal challenge. Combat continues until surrender or incapacitation. Lethal force is strictly prohibited, but injuries are expected and accepted. Do all participants freely consent to these terms? Affirmed, Skarzeth said confidently. Affirmed, Jake replied steadily. Then begin. The 3 opposing Carthax charged forward as one coordinated unit, their handlers hanging back to provide tactical commands and direction. It was a classic Draconid military strategy that had been refined over thousands of years. Overwhelm the opponent with superior numbers and practice teamwork. Jake felt Kael'mor tense beneath him. He had mounted the war beast for the first time just that morning. Another supposedly impossible thing that the Academy scientists were still trying to explain and understand. The bond between Jake and Kael'mor hummed with shared awareness and perfect understanding. "They expect us to match their formation and fight the way they fight," Jake murmured quietly. "Let us give them something completely different instead." Kael'mor bolted directly toward the center attacker at full speed, faster than the Draconids had anticipated or prepared for. But at the very last second, just before collision, he juked hard to the left. His 6 legs gave him maneuverability that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Jake leaned into the sharp turn, his body moving naturally with the war beast's rhythm and motion. The center Carthax's attack missed completely, striking only empty air. Before the confused beast could recover or adjust, Kael'mor had circled around behind it and struck with precise energy bursts that disabled the opponent's rear legs. The creature went down hard, not seriously injured, but effectively removed from the fight. The 2 remaining attackers split apart, trying to flank Jake and Kael'mor from both sides. But instead of retreating or defending, they went on the offensive against the closer target. The second Carthax was larger and more experienced than Kael'mor, with more battle scars and training. But what it had in raw strength and size, it clearly lacked in speed and agility. Kael'mor danced around its heavy attacks like water flowing around rocks, and Jake directed targeting markers through their bond that allowed the war beast to strike joints and vulnerable points with surgical precision. Within 90 seconds, the second opponent was down on the ground. Skarzeth's face twisted with rage and disbelief. His bonded Carthax, the largest and most battle-scarred of the 3 war beasts, charged forward with pure aggressive fury. The Draconid handler was shouting commands frantically, demanding dominance through overwhelming force. But Kael'mor did not meet the charge head-on in a contest of strength. Instead, he waited calmly until the last possible moment. Then he did something that Jake had not anticipated or planned. The war beast reared up on his 4 hind legs, his front pair lashing out with claws that could rend through armor plating. The opposing Carthax, fully committed to its forward charge, could not adjust its trajectory or momentum. Kael'mor's claws caught it across the face, not deeply enough to cause permanent injury, but enough to send an absolutely clear message about who was superior. Then Kael'mor did something that brought complete silence to the entire arena. He roared with a sound that came from somewhere deep and primal. It was not the growl of a war beast in ordinary combat. It was something that spoke of dominance and pack hierarchy, and challenges answered definitively and completely. The opposing Carthax froze in place, then slowly and deliberately lowered its head in submission and surrender. Skarzeth stared in complete disbelief as his bonded companion refused to continue fighting. The Draconid's shouted commands became shrill and desperate, but his Carthax would not move or respond. "It is over," Jake said quietly but firmly. "You and your team fought well and with honor. The challenge is satisfied." Instructor Velkoth's voice echoed across the silent arena. "Victor, Cadet Jake Morrison and Kael'mor." The arena erupted. Human cadets celebrated loudly. Some other species showed respect through their own cultural expressions. But Jake noticed the calculating looks from various Draconid officers watching from the observation platforms. He had proven himself today beyond any doubt, but he had also proven that humanity could challenge Draconid supremacy in one of the areas they had dominated for thousands of years. As Kael'mor carried him from the arena, Jake could not shake the feeling that he had just won an important battle, but positioned himself for a much larger and more dangerous war to come. 3 months had passed since the formal challenge in the arena. Jake Morrison had become something of a legend at the Coalition Academy, though he tried not to think about it too much. His scores in tactical simulation placed him in the top 5% of all cadets across every species. Kael'mor's combat ratings exceeded those of war beasts with twice as much training time and experience. But it was the bond itself that continued to puzzle scientists and make military commanders uncomfortable. Dr. Linza had become completely focused on understanding the mechanism behind Jake's alpha status. Late one evening, she sent an urgent message asking Jake to come to her research laboratory immediately. The tone of her message suggested she had discovered something important. "I have been approaching this entire problem from the wrong direction," she said the moment Jake walked through the door. Kael'mor followed close behind. the war beast having been granted unrestricted access throughout the Academy grounds weeks ago. Everyone, including myself, has been trying to understand why you specifically can bond with a Carthax. That is the wrong question entirely. The right question is this: why have humans been able to bond with so many different species throughout your history? Jake settled into a chair across from her workstation, curious about where this was leading. I am not sure I follow what you mean. Dr. Linza pulled up a holographic display showing various animals from Earth. Dogs, horses, falcons, dolphins, even certain reptiles and amphibians appeared in the floating images. Humans have a completely unique history of forming partnerships with other species. No other sentient race we have ever encountered in the galaxy has anything even remotely comparable. Most species either domesticate other creatures through force or dominate them through technology. But humans do something fundamentally different. You form genuine working relationships that cross species lines. We call it domestication, Jake offered, though I suppose it is more complex than just that simple word. Much more complex, yes. I have been studying Earth's zoological and anthropological records for weeks now. Do you know how long humans have been partnering with canines with dogs? Tens of thousands of years, at least. Maybe longer, depending on which scientist you ask. Try a minimum of 30,000 years, possibly as long as 100,000 years. Dr. Linz's large eyes were bright with excitement. Your species evolved alongside these partnerships. You did not just shape dogs through selective breeding over generations. They shaped you as well, changed you in fundamental ways. Humans who could read canine body language, who could communicate across the species barrier, who could form those deep bonds, had significant survival advantages in your early history. It became wired into your neural architecture over countless generations. Jake was beginning to understand her point. And Carthax evolved as pack hunters just like wolves did on Earth. Exactly correct. When Cale Moore evaluated you in that hangar months ago, he was not just analyzing your pheromones or chemical signals. He was reading something much deeper and more fundamental. Thousands of generations of human evolution have wired your species to understand pack dynamics in a way that even draconids, for all their chemical compatibility, simply cannot match or replicate. So you are saying I did not bond with Cale Moore despite being human. I bonded with him because I am human, because of what my species is. Precisely. And if my theory is correct, you may not be the only human capable of this. Dr. Linza pulled up another display, this one showing genetic markers and neural patterns. I have been analyzing the other human cadets at the Academy. 2 of them show very similar neural patterns to yours. If they were exposed to unbonded Carthax under the right conditions, I believe they would form bonds as well. The implications made Jake's mind race with possibilities. The Coalition has kept Carthax bonding restricted to draconids for 3,000 years. If humans can bond more effectively, that fundamentally changes the military balance of power in the galaxy. It changes far more than just that, said a new voice from the doorway. Jake turned to see Captain Hendricks entering the laboratory, accompanied by Commander Torgan. The Draconid officer's expression was unusually serious and grave. We need to show you something, Torgan said. Information that has been classified for quite some time. Dr. Linza, your research has given us clearance and justification to brief Cadet Morrison on matters that are normally restricted to senior command staff only. They led Jake and Cale Moore deep into the Academy's archives, through multiple security checkpoints that scanned everything from DNA to neural patterns to verify identity. Finally, they entered a vault that looked like it predated the current Academy structure by centuries or even millennia. Inside were records dating back thousands of years, stored in crystalline matrices that would outlast any conventional computer storage system. Commander Torgan activated one of the ancient terminals with practiced movements. The Carthax are not native to Draconid space, he began carefully. This much is public knowledge. What is not commonly known is where they originally came from, or why the first bonding protocols were established in the way they were. The terminal displayed star maps that Jake did not recognize. Then it zoomed in on a specific region of space, marked with warning symbols in multiple ancient languages. 4,000 years ago, the Carthax homeworld was invaded by an enemy we call the Velshara. They are not part of the Coalition. They do not negotiate or trade or communicate in any meaningful way. They are a hive species, united by a collective consciousness that sees all other forms of sentient life as threats that must be eliminated completely. I have never heard of them, Jake said quietly. Because they were beaten back and contained beyond the boundary of coalition space. But the cost of that victory was enormous and terrible. Dozens of intelligent species went completely extinct during the war. The Velshara had one significant weakness that we were able to exploit. They could not predict or effectively counter pack-bonded species fighting together. Their hive mind gave them perfect coordination. But they could not understand or adapt to the dynamic between individuals who chose to fight together rather than being compelled to fight by a single controlling intelligence. The Carthax were essential to defeating them, Captain Hendricks added. But the original Carthax handlers were not draconids at all. The terminal displayed an image that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Ancient warriors, clearly bipedal and humanoid, wearing primitive armor and carrying weapons. They looked almost human, but not quite exactly. The proportions were slightly different, the facial structure more angular and sharp. But the resemblance to humanity was absolutely unmistakable and could not be denied. They called themselves the Areth. Commander Torgan continued, his voice quiet and respectful. We believe they were an evolutionary cousin of humanity, though from a completely different star system far from Earth. They were brilliant strategists and natural pack leaders. With bonded Carthax fighting at their side, they formed the core of the coalition defense forces that turned back the Velshara invasion. What happened to them? Jake asked. Though part of him already suspected the answer. They disappeared completely. The official historical records claim they were lost in the final battle that drove the Velshara back beyond our borders. But there are other theories and alternative explanations. Some believe they were deliberately erased from history because they had become too powerful and too influential. Others say they somehow transcended physical form and became something beyond flesh and blood. A few suggest they simply left, tired of fighting wars for other species that could not or would not protect themselves. Jake studied the ancient image of the Areth warriors standing beside their Carthax companions. The bond between them was obvious and clear even in holographic recordings that were thousands of years old. And now you think humanity might be their successors? That we might be related to them somehow? We think humanity might actually be them, Dr. Linza said quietly but firmly. Or at least directly descended from them. The genetic markers align far too closely to be simple coincidence or random chance. Human DNA contains specific sequences that do not match the evolutionary path of your known ancestors on Earth. Your scientific community has attributed this to contamination or measurement error. But what if it represents something else entirely? What if we are looking at a colony population that was isolated for thousands of years and eventually forgot its true origins? Captain Hendricks finished the thought. Earth is extremely far from the coalition core worlds and central systems. The Areth had advanced space travel technology. If a group of them found Earth during humanity's prehistoric period and settled there, if they interbred with early human populations, then humans are not a new species just now joining the coalition for the first time, Jake said slowly, working through the implications. We are an ancient species returning to the galactic community after thousands of years of isolation. Commander Torgan nodded gravely. And if that theory is correct, then the Velshara are going to be extremely interested in your return to the galactic stage. Our intelligence services suggest they have been testing the boundary defenses again in recent months. Their last major offensive was barely contained, and that was 500 years ago. The coalition has grown soft and complacent during the long peace. We have forgotten how to fight them effectively. But the Areth knew how to fight them, Jake said with growing understanding. And if we are their descendants, then maybe we remember that knowledge on some deep level that goes beyond conscious thought. That is why I can bond with Kael'mor so naturally. Why humans instinctively understand pack dynamics. It is not just evolution on Earth adapting to work with dogs and other animals. It is who we have always been, who we were before we ever arrived on Earth. Which brings us to the reason we have shown you all of this classified information. Captain Hendricks pulled up a military briefing marked with the highest security classification levels. The Coalition High Command is deeply divided on what to do about humanity's bonding potential. Some powerful factions see you and other humans as a potential threat to the established order. Others see you as a necessary tool to be used when convenient. But everyone agrees on one fundamental point. When the Velshara come again, and all the evidence suggests they will come eventually, We are going to need every possible advantage we can find. You want to expand the human bonding program significantly, Jake said, understanding their purpose. You want to bond more humans with more Carthax. We want to rebuild what was lost 4,000 years ago, Commander Torgan corrected. The Aerith did not just have simple bonded pairs working alone. They had pack forces, multiple handlers, working with multiple war beasts in perfect coordination and harmony. The combat effectiveness was legendary throughout the galaxy. If humans can recreate that ancient system, if you can remember what your ancestors knew. And if we cannot, Jake challenged, what happens if humans fail to live up to these expectations? Then we try to hold the defensive line with whatever forces we have and hope desperately that it is enough. The Draconid's tone made it absolutely clear he did not believe current coalition forces would be sufficient. Jake looked down at Kale Moore. The war beast's 3 eyes gazed back at him with unwavering trust and loyalty. In just 3 months, they had become far more than simply a bonded combat pair. They had become genuine partners in the truest sense. Friends even, though that word seemed inadequate for describing what they shared. How much time do we have before the Velshara come? Jake asked directly. Intelligence estimates range anywhere from 5 years to 50 years before the next major incursion. Captain Hendricks replied honestly. But that is essentially an educated guess based on incomplete data and uncertain projections. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen a century from now. We simply do not know for certain. Then we had better start preparing immediately, Jake said with determination. Because if humanity really is connected to the Aerith, if we truly are their descendants or successors, then we have 4,000 years of history and expectations to live up to. The weight of that legacy settled on his shoulders like physical pressure, but Jake stood straight under it. The galaxy needed what humanity could offer. The Velshara were coming eventually, and when they arrived, humans bonded with Carthax war beasts would stand ready to face them. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison first arrived at the Galactic Coalition Academy. The human program had expanded dramatically in that time. 22 additional human cadets had been brought from Earth, carefully selected from various military forces based on neural compatibility markers that Dr. Linza's research had identified. Of those 22 candidates, 16 had successfully bonded with Carthax war beasts. The implications had spread throughout the coalition like ripples across still water, touching everything and everyone. The training complex dedicated specifically to human Carthax pairs now occupied an entire section of the academy grounds. Jake found himself in an unexpected role. He was not just a cadet anymore. He had become an informal teacher and leader, helping other humans learn the subtle and difficult art of pack bonding. It was not something that could be fully explained through written manuals or classroom lectures. It had to be felt, experienced, understood on a deep instinctive level that went beyond words. The key is trust, not control, Jake explained to Ryan Fletcher, one of the newer human cadets. They stood watching as Ryan's bonded Carthax, a war beast named Vormas, practiced formation drills with increasing skill. The Draconids try to establish dominance through chemical signaling and sheer force of will. That approach works to some degree, but it creates a partnership based primarily on obedience and submission. We are trying to build something fundamentally different here. You mean cooperation instead of domination, Ryan said, understanding beginning to show in his expression. Like the working dogs back home on Earth. They follow commands because they genuinely want to succeed at the task, not because they are being forced or compelled to obey. Exactly right. Vormas is not your weapon or your tool. He is your partner and companion. Once you both truly understand and accept that relationship, everything else starts to fall into place naturally. The approach had proven devastatingly effective in practice. In combat simulations and training exercises, human Carthax pairs consistently outperformed traditional Draconid bonded teams by significant margins. The difference was not in raw physical power or maximum speed. It was in adaptability, creativity, and initiative. Draconid handlers directed their Carthax with precision and discipline, but very limited flexibility. Human bonded Carthax seemed to anticipate changing situations and respond to unexpected circumstances with minimal direct input from their partners. Not everyone in the coalition leadership, was pleased with this development. Jake was summoned to appear before the Academy Council, the governing body composed of senior military officers from the Coalition's founding species. He entered the council chamber with Kyle Moore walking calmly at his side, immediately noting the calculated political arrangement of the large room. Draconid council members dominated the center positions of power, with representatives from other species carefully arranged in a precise hierarchy that reflected millennia of accumulated influence. High Commander Velthara was the most senior Draconid officer in the entire Coalition military structure. His eyes had witnessed centuries of warfare and political maneuvering. He studied Jake with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts or intentions. Cadet Morrison, Velthara began formally. Your accomplishments over the past 6 months have not gone unnoticed by this council or by Coalition leadership generally. In less than 1 standard year, you have transformed yourself from an unknown human into a symbol of your species' unexpected potential. I have simply tried to do my duty to the best of my ability. Sir? Jake replied carefully, aware that every word was being analyzed for hidden meanings. Duty. An interesting and flexible concept. Velthara's expression remained completely unreadable. Where does a human's primary duty and loyalty lie, Cadet? To the Coalition that welcomed your species into the galactic community, or to humanity's advancement and increased influence within that Coalition structure? The question was clearly a carefully designed trap. Answer incorrectly and Jake would provide political ammunition to factions that saw humans as a threat to the established order. I do not see those as fundamentally separate or conflicting goals, sir. Humanity's success and development strengthens the Coalition as a whole. A stronger and more capable Coalition better protects all member species, including humanity. We rise together or fall separately. A very diplomatic answer indeed. But diplomacy is not why you have been summoned before this council today. Velthara made a gesture, and holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing sectors of space far beyond Coalition territorial boundaries. 3 weeks ago, our border monitoring stations detected highly unusual activity in the frontier zones. Energy signatures and drive patterns consistent with Velshara scout ships. They have not yet violated Coalition space directly, but the pattern strongly suggests probing actions. They are testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. The entire council chamber fell into tense silence. Every species represented there had lost countless ancestors to the ancient Velshara conflict. The very name carried weight and fear. The timing of these probe actions is not coincidental, continued a Valorian council member named Krisha, her voice tight with concern. The Velshara have demonstrated sophisticated ability to monitor Coalition communications and gather intelligence. They know about the human bonding program. They know about you specifically, Cadet Morrison, and what you represent. If the historical theories about the Areth are correct, Dr. Linza added from her position among the scientific advisors, then the Velshara collective consciousness may perceive humanity as the return of their ancient enemy. Pack-bonded forces were absolutely instrumental in their defeat 4,000 years ago. They will not want to face that tactical advantage again if they can possibly prevent it. Which means, High Commander Velthara said, his intense eyes fixing directly on Jake, you and your fellow humans may have inadvertently accelerated a major conflict we had hoped to avoid or delay for at least another generation. The question now before this council is whether the human bonding program should continue on its current trajectory, or whether it should be severely restricted, or even terminated entirely to avoid further provocation of the Velshara. Jake felt Kelmore tense noticeably beside him. The war beast's opinion about being forcibly separated from his bonded partner was abundantly clear. Judging by the crystalline spikes glowing with agitated orange light along his spine, Kaelmore's willingness to violently resist such separation was also obvious to everyone in the chamber. With all due respect, High Commander, Jake said, keeping his voice level and professional despite his rising anger, that critical decision has already been made. Not by me, not by humanity as a whole, but by the Carthax themselves. They have chosen their partners freely and completely. Breaking those established bonds now would be both cruel to the individuals involved and strategically counterproductive for Coalition defense. Counterproductive? A Draconid general named Karseth leaned forward with obvious aggression. Or perhaps just inconvenient for expanding human political ambitions and influence. Counterproductive for overall coalition military defense, Jake responded firmly. You have all seen the objective performance metrics and combat simulation results. Human-bonded pairs exceed traditional Draconid teams in every measurable tactical category. If the Velshara truly are preparing for another major incursion, you will desperately need every possible advantage you can deploy. Disbanding or restricting the most effective combat units you currently possess because of political concerns or species pride would be a complete strategic disaster. Bold words from a mere first-year cadet. Karseth hissed with barely contained fury. Accurate words based on verifiable data. Commander Torgan interjected, speaking up firmly from his position among the senior military advisors. I have personally reviewed all the tactical analysis and training reports. Morrison is fundamentally correct in his assessment. Human Carthax pairs represent a force multiplication factor we have not seen since the original Aerith era. Eliminating that decisive advantage on the eve of potential renewed conflict would be military folly of the highest order. The debate continued for many hours. Jake stood his ground, supported by detailed testimony from Dr. Linza, Commander Torgan, and Captain Hendricks. Gradually, slowly, the political calculus began to shift in the chamber. The traditionalist factions who desperately wanted to maintain Draconid supremacy and dominance found themselves increasingly opposed by pragmatic officers who prioritized coalition survival over species pride and ancient hierarchies. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, High Commander Velthera raised one hand for complete silence. This council has reached its decision through proper voting procedures. The human bonding program will continue without restrictions. Furthermore, it will be significantly expanded and officially formalized. Cadet Morrison, you are hereby promoted to the rank of training officer effective immediately. You will oversee the development of comprehensive pack force protocols based on recovered Areth historical records. Additional human recruits will be transported from Earth as quickly as possible, pending compatibility testing and evaluation. Jake felt the enormous weight of that responsibility settle firmly over him, like a physical burden. Understood completely, sir. I will not let the coalition down. See that you do not fail us, Officer Morrison. Because if the Velshara do launch another major offensive, and if humanity's prominent presence in our forces causes them to attack sooner than they otherwise would have, then you and your bonded forces will stand at the very front of our defensive lines. That designation carries both tremendous honor and crushing burden in equal measure. 3 months later, Jake stood in a massive new training facility designed specifically for advanced pack force operations. 40 human handlers worked intensively with their bonded Carthax, practicing the complex coordination maneuvers that ancient Areth records suggested, but did not fully explain in detail. It was part careful historical recreation, part creative innovation, and entirely necessary for survival. Ryan Fletcher approached with Vormass, both handler and warbeast, visibly covered in sweat from a particularly demanding exercise sequence. We have finally got the basic formation patterns down reasonably well, Ryan reported. But the advanced multi-unit coordination is still extremely rough and inconsistent. Getting 6 bonded pairs to move and fight as a single coordinated unit is like trying to choreograph interpretive dance with a dozen participants who all speak completely different languages. That is because you are still thinking of it as mechanical coordination, Jake said thoughtfully. Try thinking of it as natural conversation instead. Each bonded pair is a distinct voice in a larger ongoing dialogue. You are not simply moving in rigid formation. You are moving in organic harmony. That sounds poetic and inspiring, but it is significantly harder to actually do in practice. Everything truly worthwhile is difficult. Jake watched as Katie Martinez, another skilled human officer, led her 3-pair pack unit through a simulated combat assault. Her team moved with steadily increasing fluidity and grace, the Carthax responding not just to individual verbal commands, but to the collective intent and purpose of the entire group. It was simultaneously beautiful and absolutely terrifying to observe. Kaelmore rumbled softly beside Jake, and the warbeast's attention suddenly shifted toward the entrance. A moment later, emergency alarms began blaring loudly throughout the entire academy complex. Captain Hendricks burst into the training facility at a full run. Multiple border monitoring stations are under direct attack right now. Dozens of Velshara warships have crossed into coalition space in force. This is not another probe or test. This is the actual beginning of a full-scale military incursion. Jake's blood ran cold with fear, but his training and discipline immediately took over. How long until Velshara forces reach core population systems? Current estimates vary wildly. Maybe several weeks if we can slow their advance. Maybe just days if they have significantly more ships than our sensors are currently detecting. Captain Hendricks met his eyes directly. Coalition High Command is mobilizing the entire defense fleet as we speak. They are calling up all bonded pairs for immediate deployment, including cadets and trainees. You are going to war, Jake. All of you are going to face the enemy very soon. The massive training facility fell into complete silence. 40 humans and 40 Carthax stood together, facing an uncertain and dangerous future. Jake looked carefully at each person and war beast, seeing fear, determination, and fierce resolve in equal measures on every face. Everyone listen to me carefully, Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly across the entire space. I know that most of you did not sign up for this program expecting to face the galaxy's most terrifying nightmare monsters in your very first year of service. I know you are frightened and uncertain. I am scared too, if I am being completely honest. But we are not just humans anymore. We are not just ordinary coalition soldiers. We are the return of something powerful and dangerous that the Velshara feared enough to try erasing completely from history. We are pack-bonded forces, and we are going to remind them exactly why that reality terrified them 4,000 years ago. Kael'mor rose to his full impressive height and roared with primal power. One by one, all the other Carthax joined him in that defiant sound, their crystalline spikes blazing with brilliant light of many colors. The combined roar was primal, powerful, and utterly defiant of any threat. The humans added their own voices to create a genuine battle cry that echoed powerfully through the facility and out across the entire Academy grounds. Other species stopped their activities and stared, hearing in that unified sound something ancient and fierce awakening after 4,000 years of dormant silence. Far away in the darkness beyond Coalition space, the Velshara hive mind registered the presence of disturbingly familiar patterns in their monitoring data. Ancient enemies they had believed extinct and eliminated. Pack hunters fighting alongside their chosen bonded companions. The invasion calculus shifted and adjusted, but the hive mind had already committed massive forces to the offensive. The war had truly begun. Jake Morrison stood with his hand resting on Kael'mor's crystalline spine, feeling the powerful bond between them thrumming with shared purpose and determination. They were going to war together, not as conquerors seeking glory or dominators enforcing will, but as genuine partners, as pack. The galaxy was about to remember what that ancient word truly meant, and the Velshara were about to discover that the complete extinction of the Areth had been greatly exaggerated throughout history. The legendary warriors had simply gone dormant, waiting patiently in an isolated corner of space called Earth for the crucial moment when they would be desperately needed again. That moment of destiny had finally arrived. The war beast had acknowledged his alpha. Now the pack would show the entire galaxy exactly why that acknowledgement mattered so much.